Istanbul, 1640. A door opens in the Topkapi Palace, and for the first time in 22 years, a man sees sunlight. He is 25 years old. He has spent more than half his life in a single room, waiting either to become sultan or to be strangled with a silk cord. Now his brother is dead, and servants have come to tell him he is the ruler of the Ottoman Empire. He does not believe them. He barricades himself inside, convinced this is a trick to murder him. Only when they bring his brother's corpse to the door does he finally emerge, and even then, his mother has to coax him out like a frightened animal. This is Ibrahim, who history will remember as the Mad. And he is not mad because he was born that way.
He is mad because the Ottoman Empire made him so. This is the story of the kafes, the golden cage where Ottoman princes spent their lives waiting to rule or die. It is a story of fratricide and paranoia, of mothers who murdered sons and sons who murdered brothers. And it is the story of what happens when you raise kings in cages. To understand the kafes, you must first understand what came before it. For centuries, the Ottomans had a simple solution to the problem of royal succession. When a sultan died, his sons would race to claim the throne. Whoever won would execute all his brothers. This was not merely custom, it was law. In the 15th century, Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, codified this practice into official policy.
His law stated that for the order of the world, whichever prince seized the throne after the sultan's death had the right to execute his brothers. The logic was brutal but clear. Ottoman princes were raised to be warriors. They governed provinces, commanded armies, built followings. If any survived after a succession, they would inevitably rebel, tearing the empire apart in civil war. Better to kill them all at once. For 150 years, this system worked. It produced strong, ruthless sultans who had proven their fitness to rule by eliminating their competition. It also produced rivers of royal blood. At least 80 members of the House of Osman died under Mehmed's law, strangled by mutes with silk cords, because Ottoman custom forbade the spilling of royal blood. Then came the night of the 19 coffins. In 1595, Sultan Murad III died, and his son Mehmed III claimed the throne. Mehmed was taking no chances. He summoned all 19 of his brothers to his throne room, telling them they had nothing to fear. They were there, he said, for a circumcision ceremony. In the next room, the mute executioners waited. One by one, the princes entered. One by one, they were strangled with silk cords. The youngest was 11 years old. Some sources say there were also pregnant concubines, women carrying potential heirs who might one day challenge Mehmed's sons. They too were drowned in the Bosphorus. 19 coffins emerged from the palace that night. The entire city knew what had happened. And something changed in the Ottoman soul. When Mehmed III's son, Ahmed I, became sultan in 1603, he was only 13 years old. He had a younger half-brother named Mustafa, mentally impaired from birth, who posed no real threat. Ahmed could not bring himself to order the execution. Perhaps he was too young. Perhaps he had seen too much. Perhaps his advisors convinced him that killing a helpless invalid would bring divine punishment. Whatever the reason, Ahmed I spared his brother.
And in doing so, he created the kafes. The kafes, which means cage in Turkish, was a suite of rooms in the imperial harem of the Topkapi Palace. From the outside, it was beautiful. Stained glass windows in brilliant blues cast an underwater light across tiled walls and carpeted floors. But the windows did not open. The doors were guarded day and night, and once a prince entered, he might never leave. The rules were strict. Princes entered the kafes around the age of 7 or 8, when they became old enough to be dangerous. They remained there until they either died of old age, were strangled on a new sultan's orders, or were suddenly released to take the throne themselves. Inside, they had servants, tutors, and sometimes concubines.
But the concubines were carefully selected to be infertile, or their relationships were monitored to prevent pregnancies. The princes were not allowed to father children. They were not allowed to leave. They were not allowed to communicate with the outside world, or learn anything about politics, warfare, or governance. Earlier sultans had trained their sons by giving them provinces to rule. Young princes would govern cities, command troops, learn the arts of diplomacy and administration. They arrived at the throne experienced and capable. The kafes princes arrived at the throne knowing nothing except fear. The first true product of the kafes was Mustafa I himself. After Ahmed I died in 1617, his brother Mustafa was released from years of confinement and made sultan. It was the first time in Ottoman history that a brother succeeded a brother instead of a son. Mustafa was not capable of ruling. Years of isolation had destroyed whatever mental capacity he had possessed. He wandered the palace, pulling the beards of his viziers and yanking off their turbans. He threw coins to fish in the palace pools, apparently believing they needed money. The English ambassador Thomas Roe wrote that Mustafa was rather holy than wise, and indeed fitter for a cell than a scepter. After 3 months, he was deposed in favor of Ahmed's teenage son, Osman II. But when Osman tried to reform the Janissaries and they revolted, they killed him in the most humiliating way possible, crushing his testicles before strangling him. Then they put Mustafa back on the throne. His second reign was no better than his first. Mustafa believed Osman was still alive. He wandered the palace, knocking on doors, calling for his nephew to come and relieve him of the burden of rule. Eventually, his own mother agreed to his deposition, on the condition that his life would be spared. Mustafa spent his remaining years in the kafes. He died in 1639, having been sultan twice and capable of being sultan never. But Mustafa was merely the beginning. The true horrors of the kafes system came with the next generation.
Murad IV, who replaced Mustafa in 1623, had spent his early childhood in the kafes before being released at age 11. He emerged paranoid, violent, and determined to show strength. He executed 4 of his brothers during his reign, leaving only one alive, Ibrahim, the youngest, who was considered too mentally weak to be a threat. Ibrahim had entered the kafes at age 8. He remained there for 22 years. Try to imagine those years. Ibrahim knew that all his brothers had been strangled on the Sultan's orders. He knew that every knock on the door might be the executioner. He lived in constant terror, never knowing if he would survive another day.
He had no contact with the outside world, no education in governance, no experience of normal human life. His only companions were servants, who might be spies, and concubines, who might be sent to inform on him. When Murad IV died of cirrhosis in 1640, at age 27, Ibrahim was the last surviving male of the Ottoman dynasty. Servants came to tell him he was now sultan. He refused to believe them. He barricaded himself in his room, convinced they had come to kill him. Only when they brought Murad's corpse to his door did he finally emerge, coaxed out by his mother, Kosem Sultan, like a frightened animal being lured from its cage with food. What followed was one of the strangest and most disturbing reigns in Ottoman history.
Ibrahim had no idea how to rule. He had no interest in ruling. He had spent 22 years waiting to die, and now suddenly he was supposed to command an empire. His advisors quickly realized that the new sultan was damaged beyond repair, and they adopted a simple strategy: keep Ibrahim distracted while they ran the empire themselves. The distraction they chose was the harem. Ibrahim threw himself into the pleasures of the flesh with the desperation of a man who had been denied everything. He collected concubines obsessively, reportedly sleeping with 24 different women in a single day. He developed a particular taste for large women, sending agents throughout the empire to find the fattest candidates.
One of his favorites, nicknamed Sugar, was described as the fattest woman in Constantinople. He adorned his beard with diamonds. He had palace rooms lined with sable fur. He ran naked through gardens while his concubines pretended to be mares and he played the stallion. He became obsessed with amber perfume, drenching everything in it until the palace reeked. And then came the drownings. According to the most notorious story of Ibrahim's reign, his concubine Sugar whispered to him one night that one of the harem women had been compromised by an outsider. Someone had slept with a man other than the sultan. Sugar claimed not to know who. Ibrahim raged. He ordered investigations, interrogations, torture. No one would confess. No one would give up a name. Perhaps there was no name to give. Perhaps Sugar had invented the whole thing out of jealousy or malice. It did not matter. Ibrahim ordered his entire harem, all 280 women, tied into weighted sacks and thrown into the Bosphorus. Only one survived, hauled from the water by passing sailors. She told the city what had happened. The story spread, and even by Ottoman standards, this was too much. Ibrahim's mother, Kusem Sultan, had tolerated her son's madness because it gave her power, but Ibrahim eventually turned on her, exiling her from the court and threatening her life. He humiliated his sisters, stripping them of their lands and jewels to give to his favorites. He emptied the treasury. He bungled a war with Venice that resulted in a blockade of Constantinople itself. In 1648, the Janissaries revolted. They tore the Grand Vizier to pieces in the streets. Ibrahim was deposed in favor of his 6-year-old son, Mehmed IV. And then, after a fatwa was issued declaring his execution lawful, Ibrahim was strangled with a silk cord. He was 32 years old. He had spent 22 of those years in the kafes, 8 on the throne, and perhaps not a single day at peace. The tragedy of Ibrahim illuminates the fundamental flaw of the kafes system. It solved one problem, the bloody succession wars that had threatened to tear the empire apart, by creating another problem equally severe. The sultans who emerged from the kafes were traumatized, inexperienced, and often mentally unstable. They had been raised to be prisoners, not rulers. The old system of fratricide produced ruthless but capable sultans. The kafes produced sultans who might be gentle but were often mad. Kusem Sultan herself understood this better than anyone. She had navigated Ottoman politics for decades, serving as regent for her sons and grandson. She had helped put Ibrahim on the throne and helped remove him from it. After his death, she continued to rule through her 6-year-old grandson, Mehmed IV. But Mehmet's mother, Turhan Sultan, was building her own faction. The two women, grandmother and mother, began a silent war for control of the child sultan and the empire. Kusem planned to depose Mehmed and replace him with a more pliable grandson whose mother would not challenge her. Turhan learned of the plot. In 1651, she sent her agents to strangle Kusem Sultan with the strings of a curtain. The most powerful woman in Ottoman history died at 62, murdered by her own grandson's mother. The kafes system continued for another 2.5 centuries. Sultan after sultan emerged from its rooms, some capable, many damaged, all unprepared. The longest-serving prisoner was Mehmed VI Vahidi Teen, who spent nearly his entire life in confinement before ascending to the throne at age 56. He was the last sultan, ruling until the Ottoman Empire was dissolved after World War I. When Suleiman II was finally released in 1687, after 36 years in the kafes, he spoke words that could have been spoken by any of its victims. "If my death has been commanded, say so. Since my childhood, I have suffered 40 years of imprisonment. It is better to die once than to die every day. What terror we endure for a single breath. What terror we endure for a single breath." The kafes was a solution born of desperation. After the horror of the 19 coffins, the Ottomans could not stomach more mass executions. But they could not free the princes either, knowing that free princes meant civil war. So they chose a middle path, imprisonment instead of execution, living death instead of actual death. It was meant to be humane. It was meant to preserve the dynasty while reducing bloodshed. And in a narrow sense, it worked. The Ottoman line survived when it might otherwise have been extinguished. But the cost was measured in minds broken by isolation, in sultans unfit to rule, in an empire gradually weakened by leaders who had never learned how to lead. The kafes did not save the Ottoman Empire. It merely changed the way the empire destroyed itself. The rooms of the kafes still exist in the Topkapi Palace, open now to tourists who walk through them without understanding what happened there. The stained glass windows still cast their blue light across the tiles. The walls are still beautiful, and if you stand very quietly, you can almost hear the footsteps of a small boy entering a room from which he might never emerge, wondering whether his next visitor will bring food or a silk cord. The Ottoman princes called the kafes by another name. They called it the place of the curtains. Behind those curtains, generation after generation of princes waited in the blue light, hoping for a throne, expecting a murder, their sanity slowly dissolving like sugar in water. Some emerged as sultans, most died as prisoners. And all of them paid the price for a system that traded one cruelty for another, discovering too late that there is no humane way to raise kings in cages. The silk cords are gone now. The executioners are gone. The empire itself is gone, dissolved into history. But the kafes remains, its blue windows still glowing in the Istanbul sun, a monument to the terrible things that power does to those who seek it and those who fear it. And somewhere, in some palace or prison or comfortable room that might as well be a prison, there are still people waiting behind curtains, dying a little every day, hoping for a throne or a death that never comes. Some things change, some things never do.